Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 5, Elasticity and its applications. Now, before we talked about the supply curve, demand curve, and how they interact with each other to give us a clear picture of the equilibrium point at which transactions happen. Now, in this session, we're going to talk about exactly the mathematics behind these transactions. Let's look at a simple example here. Now, assume you're a software developer, a computer engineer. You charge $200 per website you design, and you can right now design 12 websites every month. Now, your costs are always increasing. Why is that? Because there is a law of demand for costs, just as for the product that you're selling to people, you have to buy something from someone else, from some market. For example, you need to buy a laptop, you need to buy electricity from your electricity company. For example, Duke Energy here in North Carolina. So your costs are always rising. For every market with a supply and demand curve, there are certain inputs that are needed to produce the supply. And these inputs are the demand in another market. For example, you go to the gas station, you buy some gas, you put gas in your car. For that gas, there's a supply curve, there's a demand curve. But then, in order to produce gas, the company needs to buy crude oil. So there is an oil market as well. In another market, instead of being the supply, gas is actually the demand, and oil is needed to produce that gas. Gas companies are on the demand side. They're the consumers. They would purchase oil, and so, for example, let's use an example. A BP, for example. In your market, when you go to the gas station, BP is the supplier, and you're the consumer. In another market, which is the crude oil market or some input market, like labor market, BP is the consumer, and the labor force, or a country producing oil and exporting oil like Saudi Arabia, is now the supplier. So your costs are always rising. Another example is the opportunity cost of your time. When you're working for yourself, I'll assume that you're a small business owner or you're self-employed. You're working for yourself, your costs are what you're giving up. I can work 8 hours, yes, but then what if I work 10 hours? The next 2 hours I'll be a lot more tired and exhausted. What about 12 hours? 12 hours, I'll be more exhausted and more exhausted. What about 14, 15, 16 hours? If I work 16 hours a day, the last few hours, I'll be really tired, really under pressure. So my opportunity cost will constantly rise, the opportunity cost of my time, because I need that few hours at the end to actually get some rest, to eat something, to take a shower, to get some sleep. If I give them up, the quality of my life will go down tremendously. So your costs are rising. Now, you consider raising the price to $250. The law of demand says you won't sell as many websites if you raise your price. When you increase your prices, some people who are undecided on whether to buy your service or not, they would leave the market. The law of demand says you won't sell as many websites if you raise your prices. How many fewer websites? How much will your revenue fall? Or will it probably increase, maybe? These are the questions when we talk about how many or how much. It's why we need elasticity. Another example, for example, you assume that you're the economic advisor of a huge multinational corporation. or a small company. The CEO of that company asks you, we're about to raise our prices next year. Will we be selling more or less? Now, you can say, okay, law of demand says that if you raise your prices, you will be definitely selling fewer goods or less material. But then he says, I know that. I'm a super smart person. I'm a CEO of a huge company, so I know that. These are common sense. But how much fewer? How much less? This is the question I want you to answer. I want the number. And if you want to give an exact number, you need elasticity. Elasticity is how responsive a curve is. It's a term from mathematics, and it tells us how responsive something is to changes in the dynamics. The elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness of quantity of demand or quantity of supply. It tells us how responsive are we to a change in one of the dynamics of the market. Are we very rigid? For example, some goods are not really responsive. They're more stiff and not responsive. What goods? Basic goods, goods that we need. For example, eggs. In where I'm from, egg is actually a huge part of a diet for low-income population, and they can do anything about it. They just can't change it, substitute it with something else. So if the price of egg goes up, quantity of demand will not change that much because people still need to eat. You cannot just go hungry. You need to eat. But if, for example, the price of a luxury good goes up, like jewelry, when price of jewelry goes up, its quantity demand, its quantity demanded will fall very sharply. Why? Because jewelry is a luxury. And people don't really need jewelry. No one needs jewelry to survive. These are the basic concepts. Price elasticity of demand. How much of the quantity demanded of a good responds to a change in the price of that good. Loosely speaking, it measures the price sensitivity of buyers' demand. How buyers are sensitive to change in prices. Will they stay loyal to that good or will they abandon the good if the good is now much more expensive? As you can see here, these are what we're going to cover in class shortly. Price elasticity is percentage change in quantity of demand over percentage change in price. Remember the difference between the slope of a curve. The slope of a curve is just the changes of price over changes of quantity. But here, it's the percentage changes. For example, if the absolute change is 100 on one side and 200 on the other side, the slope of that curve would be 200 over 100. But in elasticity, we don't care about the absolute values. We want to know how responsive are we, for example, the quantity to the changes, relative changes of price. When price rises by 10%, we say quantity falls by 15%. Therefore, you don't divide the absolute values here. You divide the percentage changes, the relative changes. Let me use an example. For example, I want to know that how okay, I really had an example here. Let's say, for example, for laptops. Laptops consume electricity. Now we say if, let's say, the power, the voltage of electricity going into the laptop goes up, then the laptop would be hurt. Now, in absolute terms, we say 110 volts is going into the laptop. If the 110 volts goes towards, let's say, 115 volts or 118 volts or 120 volts, in absolute terms, the laptop will be hurt by, let's say, it will lose 1 year of its life or 2 years of its life. But then, when we talk about the elasticity, we're talking about the relative changes. If the voltage of this electricity going into my laptop goes up by, let's say, 10%, which is a small amount, the life expectancy of this laptop will fall by 50%. So we can say that the laptop is very sensitive to changes in the voltage of electricity going into this. And it makes sense. That's why you have all electronics written on it, that this is only working with this exact voltage, not higher, not lower. So you need to actually be very careful of, for example, when you go to Europe or when you go to Asia and you want to use your American laptop, you have to use a certain power device to control for the voltage, because your laptop is very sensitive to the voltage of electricity going into it. Along a demand curve, price and quantity move in opposite direction, obviously, which would make price elasticity negative. As you can see, the changes in quantity is a negative term. So quantity falls by 15%. That means that 15% here, okay, this 15% here is a negative value. Minus 15% over 10%, the answer is negative 1.5. This is the elasticity of this market, this demand curve. Now, demand for websites, a standard method for computing the percentage change. These we will be covering in class. I will do it on the virtual whiteboard that I have, so that we all know what's going on here. There is a method to actually use to be able to efficiently find the elasticity. End value minus the start value over start value. This is how you find the percentage change or the rate of change for every method. This is not for economics only. This is for everyone. This is in engineering, in accounting, in every other major. In order to find the percentage change of something, you deduct the start value from the end value, so you can find how much it changed, and then you find it, you divide it over the start value itself, because you want the relative change. Is the changes big or is the changes small? You don't care about the absolute change. It is 200 units or $300 or 500 miles. You don't care about that. You want the relative number. You want to know if the change is small or big or just a little. End value minus the start value divided over start value. You do it for prices and you do it for quantities. You have the two numbers, and then you divide the changes of prices over the changes of quantity, the percentage change in quantity over the percentage change in price. And there you go, you have your elasticity. We'll do it in class in detail. Now, the midpoint is the number of halfway between the start and end value, the average of those numbers, which is also, we can use this one method to find the midpoint value. Demand for your websites, as you can see, using the midpoint value. This example we'll cover in class. Now, price elasticity of demand. There are certain determinants of price elasticity of demand. For example, suppose prices of both goods rise by 20%. Which good has the highest price elasticity of demand? Which one is more sensitive to the other, to changes in price, and why? What lesson we learn? These are theoretical arguments that you can have to understand the elasticity of certain goods. For example, let's compare two goods, breakfast cereal and sunscreen. Both of these goods prices rise by 20%. Which one people will abandon more than the other one? Which one will experience a sharper decline in quantity of demand? Breakfast cereal has close substitute, so people aren't really tied to it. If the price of your breakfast cereal goes up, you you go buy some Mexican crumbling cheese, which I really like, and consume it for your breakfast. You don't have to stick to your breakfast cereal. If the price rises, you say, oh, no, not profitable anymore, not worth it. It doesn't worth my money anymore. So instead, I buy something else, and I can still enjoy my breakfast. Sunscreen, on the other hand, it's sunscreen. When I go to the beach, I have to put on some sunscreen because otherwise I'll get sunburned. And there is no close substitute. The only substitute that I can think of is that I carry an umbrella all over the place with me, which is not really convenient. I want to be able to walk around, to swim, to do whatever I want. So sunscreen has no close substitute. So a price increase would not affect the quantity of demand that much. That means people will still have to buy it because there is no substitute for it. So price elasticity is higher when close substitutes are available. Elasticity means sensitiveness, means to be able to bend and change and be flexible. So when price elasticity is high, that means it's more flexible. It can respond easier to changes. When something is more responsible, more flexible, like this wire, I can bend it here like this very easily because this is a very elastic thing, very flexible. But something which is not really flexible or elastic is this pen. I can't really move it, it will break. It's rigid and it's inelastic. We call this inelastic. So remember, goods that are inelastic are not sensitive to changes. They just stay the same. Goods that are elastic, like this wire, they constantly respond to changes. Blue jeans versus clothing. Price of both of these goods rise by 20%. For a narrowly defined good, blue jeans, there are many substitutes. There are fewer substitutes available for broadly defined goods. When clothing in general becomes more expensive, people just can't go around shirtless or naked. They need to still buy some form of clothing. But when blue jeans go up and become more, price of blue jeans go up, and it becomes more, and they become more expensive, then I'm going to easily substitute. I'm going to buy myself a Scottish kilt, these man skirts that people in Scotland put on. I'm going to buy one of them. Or I'm going to buy uh, in southern Persia, where I'm from, there's this traditional clothes which is like one part. The whole clothes is one part. It's called dashdashe. It's like a kilt. The kilt is only the half part, but then the dashdashe covers the entire body. It's more like an Arabic style traditional clothing. So I'm going to buy one of those. I don't need to exactly buy blue jeans. But when clothing in general rise, I have to buy I have to buy some clothes. I cannot just, let's say, uh, cover myself with leaves. That would be very hilarious, but not efficient and practical. So I still need to buy clothing. Price elasticity is higher for narrowly defined goods than for broadly defined ones. Third example, insulin versus luxury boats and yachts. Price of both of these goods rise by 20%. Which one would be more elastic? Which one would be more sensitive to price changes? Think about this. If you have diabetes, that you need to consume these insulin injections, which are very important for your health. Like one of my aunts has diabetes, and she constantly has to inject insulin. She just can't give up on it, otherwise she'll die. So you have to, no matter if the price rises or price falls, you still have to buy it. But luxury boats and yachts, they're not really useful. If price rises, I'm not going to buy them. I don't have to. Why would I need a luxury boat anyway? Just 1 week or 2 weeks a year to go on holiday. So I don't actually have to buy it. That's why people are more sensitive to uh, when pharmaceutical goods change their prices. This is very important. The drug prices are very important because people just can't not consume it. There is not much economic freedom when it comes to demand for drugs and pharmaceuticals. Price elasticity of demand. One more example: gasoline in the short run versus gasoline in the long run. The price of gasoline, if it rises by 20%, what happens? Does the quantity demand drop more in the short run or in the long run? Now, price is always more elastic and responsive in the long run, because in the long run you have time to react. You can think of something, for example, 10 years ago in the United States, all over the world actually, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, oil prices went up to $120 per barrel. It was crazy. Oil rich countries like Persia became so rich, we didn't know what to do with all that money. But then the rest of the world weren't actually happy about this. The rest of the world were like, what happened? We can't live with these prices. We should do something. But then 12 years ago, people started to plan. They started to invest in new technologies, new methods to produce oil. And in a few years, thanks to fracking and investments in renewable energy and all these other sources of energy from all over the world, the demand in the market was met, and oil prices went down. So in the long run, you can respond to changes in price easier than in the short run. In the short run, if tomorrow morning there is a war in Middle East or there is another problem with the oil market, you can't really do anything about this overnight. You cannot just overnight come up with a new source of energy. You need time. You need like a few years to plan, to find investors, to find scientists, to connect them with each other. So investors invest in scientific projects, and these scientists come up with new technology like fracking or new technologies for producing renewable energy sources. And then you use these to be able to create some substitute for this crazy expensive oil so that people can actually survive. In the long run, price elasticity is much higher. Now, we have three different types of demand curves. When we say something is elastic, it means the price elasticity of demand is greater than 1. Let's look at here. What does this mean? That means when this is greater than 1, it means that for percentage changes in quantity of demand is bigger than percentage change in prices. That means when prices change, when these prices change by, let's say, 10% or a little or too much or a lot, quantity changes will always be bigger. So the good is responsive. When I put a little pressure here, this will shift, this will flex and uh, react. This is responsive, this is elastic. But then when it is inelastic, this is for the demand curve. When it is inelastic, it means the quantity of the percentage change in quantity of demand is always less than percentage change in price. So if prices change by 20%, the quantity of demand will change by a little, like 5%, because it's rigid, it's inelastic. And it also has, there is a case where it has unit elasticity. It means that for every percentage change in price, we'll have the exact percentage change in quantity. Also, there are some extreme examples. When we say perfectly inelastic, it means it never changes. It doesn't change, respond at all. No matter the price changes, the quantity of demand will stay the same, or demand is vertical. That means for every price, there is only one demand. An example would be oxygen. If the governments decide to actually nationalize oxygen or sell us oxygen, which is something that you can expect from certain governments in some parts of the world, especially if you combine the ever-increasing desire of governments to increase their revenues and expenses. They're increasing their expenses and finding new ways to waste money. And you combine it with the climate change, you could probably expect that in 50 years or 100 years, the governments would start to actually sell oxygen to people. Like if you want to breathe, you have to pay. That demand curve would be perfectly inelastic because everybody needs oxygen, and no matter how much you pay, you can just breathe less. Or like, think about this. This would be a really funny movie, I suppose, a futuristic movie about when the government actually nationalizes oxygen and starts selling oxygen to people. This would be the closest to being perfectly inelastic. Demand is perfectly elastic. That means if the prices change by just a little bit, demand will disappear. Or like just like suddenly disappear. Like people are not willing to pay even a dime to consume something. Perfectly inelastic, it means that if you increase the price of something just by a cent, everyone leaves the market. I don't know an example for this. For example, like let's say something that's free right now. If like walking on the sidewalk, like people walk on the sidewalk, but then if the government starts charging people to walk on the sidewalk, they will not walk on the sidewalk anymore. They will just go around from the side of the road, something like that. The flatter the curve, the greater the responsiveness, the greater the price elasticity of demand. Now, here you can see this. We'll cover all of this in the class. the mathematics behind this, different types of elasticities. Now, a few elasticities from the real world, as you can see in here as well, in America, eggs are really inelastic. Why? Because they're a huge part of the diet for low-income people, people with without high income. They have to consume eggs, so they cannot really respond to changes in price. Healthcare, again, very inelastic. People need it to survive. Cigarettes, inelastic, because cigarettes, they have a certain chemical in it, is called nicotine. And nicotine makes you addicted. When you start smoking, you may feel good after a few days. The feeling good will disappear. And if you don't smoke, you only feel bad. So it's addiction. Michel Houellebecq, the French author, actually says that cigarettes are the perfect drug. Nicotine is the perfect drugs because you don't feel good by using it. You only feel bad by not using it. The French author, who's I really like his books. Yeah, that's another thing here. Cigarettes, inelastic because they're addictive. Things that are addictive are inelastic because you get addicted to them. You can't just change your consumption pattern. Rice, so again, a part of low-income people diet and an important food. Housing, inelastic, people need it. They cannot just go live under a bridge. On the other hand, beef, peanut butter, restaurants, and Mountain Dews, they're all elastic. If the price of beef goes up, people will just not buy it because they can. They can substitute something else for their protein intake. Or Mountain Dews, very elastic. Mountain Dews are just not really important. Like if the price rises, you just go buy yourself a Pepsi or something. Elasticity along a linear demand curve, as you can see, changes. It's not like the slope. The slope of a curve has constant elasticity all over. Sorry, the slope of the curve is constant every point on that curve. But the elasticity of a curve changes depending on where we are now. Now, price elasticity of total revenues. Continuing our scenario, if you raise your prices from 200 to 250, would your revenue rise or fall? This is a different type. This is a more business-oriented definition of elasticity. We want to find elasticity's effect on your total revenue. Why? Because we care about revenue. If you're a business owner, you want to make money, you want to make a profit, so you care about this. The price increase has two effects on revenue. Higher revenue because price went up, lower revenues because now law of demand, prices went up, people would leave the market. So you sell fewer goods. You want to know which one is bigger, so which effect is bigger, so your revenues will actually go up or go down. And it all depends on price elasticity of demand. From price elasticity of demand to total revenue. For a price increase, if demand is inelastic, uh, if demand is, sorry, for a price increase, if demand is elastic, that means the one percentage changes in quantity is greater than the percentage change in prices. Therefore, total revenues decrease. The fall in revenue from lower quantity would be bigger than the increase in revenue from higher prices. For a price increase, if demand is inelastic, that which means the percentage change in quantity is smaller than the percentage change in price, Rising prices will increase the revenues of the producer because now the effect of increasing prices is bigger than the effects of quantity going down. For profits, you can always say when something is inelastic, profits would go up by increasing prices further and further and further. These are again the mathematics behind this, and this example will cover this in class. Now, let's stop here, take a quick break, 5 minutes, and then we'll see each other to cover the drug interdiction and drug policy. Why do we need to know about elasticity when we talk about drugs? See you in a bit.